Something that I did keep thinking about is that figure skater. She talks about fun maxing. It's like, so she retired for 3 years.
The story doesn't start inside an octagon. It doesn't start with punches or knockouts or roaring crowds. It starts in silence. The kind of silence that creeps in when everything you've built suddenly stops moving, when momentum disappears overnight, when your body, the very thing that made you dangerous, betrays you. Casey O'Neill knew that silence better than most, because one moment she was rising, fast, undefeated, dangerous, the kind of fighter people whisper about as future champion. And the next moment, she was gone. Not defeated, not exposed, just erased from the conversation. 600 days. That's not just time. That's isolation. That's doubt. That's waking up every day wondering if the version of you that once existed is already gone. And here's the thing, nobody tells you about injuries. It's not just physical pain. It's not just rehab sessions and surgeries and slow recovery. It's what happens in your head. The questions, the fear, the identity crisis. Who are you when you can't do the one thing that defines you? Casey O'Neill was asking herself that exact question. Because before all of this, everything was clicking. She wasn't just winning, she was finishing fights, making statements, building momentum in a division that doesn't forgive weakness. Every performance was another step closer to the top. Then came the tear. The ACL. A single moment that changed everything. Just like that, the climb stopped. Fights canceled, rankings frozen, momentum gone. And what followed wasn't just one setback. It was a chain reaction, surgery after surgery, rehab that felt endless, progress that came painfully slow, days that blurred together. And in that time, something dangerous started to grow. Doubt. Not the loud kind, not the kind that screams in your face, the quiet kind, the one that whispers. What if you never come back the same? What if it's over? What if people were wrong about you? And those whispers, they get louder in silence. Now imagine sitting there, your body still healing, your future uncertain, watching the world move on without you. New fighters rising, new stories being told, and your name slowly fading from the spotlight. That's where she was. Not in a gym, not in a fight camp, just stuck. And here's where the story takes a turn nobody saw coming, because the thing that would eventually pull Casey O'Neill out of that darkness wasn't a coach. It wasn't a new training method. It wasn't some secret fight strategy. It was a figure skater. Think about that for a second. A UFC fighter. One of the most brutal, unforgiving sports in the world. And the breakthrough not comes from watching someone glide across ice. It sounds insane. It sounds disconnected. But sometimes the most powerful shifts come from the places you least expect. Casey wasn't even looking for inspiration. That's what makes this even more real. She wasn't sitting there trying to fix her mindset. She wasn't searching for answers. She was just watching. The 2026 Winter Olympics. Just another broadcast. Just something to pass the time. Until Alysa Liu stepped onto the ice. Now, if you don't know her story, it almost sounds unreal. A prodigy. A teenage sensation. Someone who reached the top levels of her sport before most athletes even understand what pressure feels like. And then she walked away. At 16. No scandal. No dramatic fall. She just left. And that alone is enough to confuse people. Because in a world obsessed with winning, obsessed with climbing higher, quitting at 16 doesn't make sense. But what happened next makes even less sense. She came back. Not slowly, not cautiously. She came back and dominated. Olympic gold. Let that sink in. Leave the sport at 16, return years later, and stand at the very top of the world. That doesn't happen. Not like that. So naturally, people wanted answers. What changed? What made it possible? What kind of mindset allows someone to step away, detach from everything, and then come back stronger than ever? And that's when Alysa Liu said something that didn't just surprise people. It shook them. She said, winning and losing didn't matter to her anymore. Medals didn't fulfill her. She didn't skate for validation. She skated because she liked to skate. That's it. No deep philosophy, no complex system, just enjoyment. And for most people watching, that might sound simple, maybe even naive. But for Casey O'Neill, sitting there in that moment, it hit differently. Because she wasn't in a place of simplicity. She was in a place of pressure, of expectation, of fear. Her entire career up to that point had been driven by something else. Proving people wrong. Feeding off energy. Fighting with emotion, with anger, with something to prove. And suddenly, here's this Olympic gold medalist saying none of that matters. Imagine hearing that when you're at your lowest, when everything you've built feels fragile, when your identity is tied to winning, and someone at the very top of their sport is telling you, that's not the point. That's when something shifts. Not instantly, not dramatically, but quietly. A realization begins to form. What if the pressure wasn't the problem? What if chasing results is what's holding you back? What if the version of yourself you're trying so hard to rebuild was never the best version to begin with? And that's a dangerous thought, because it forces you to question everything. The way you train, the way you think, the reason you even do this. Casey O'Neill didn't just hear Alysa Liu's words, she absorbed them. And more importantly, she tested them. Because ideas are easy. Mindsets sound good in interviews. But inside a fight, under pressure, with everything on the line, that's where truth gets exposed. And Casey was about to find out if this simple philosophy could survive in one of the most brutal environments in sports. But before she ever stepped back into the octagon, something had already changed. The way she saw herself, the way she approached the game, the weight she carried into every moment. It started to lift, not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to create space, enough to breathe, enough to consider a version of herself that wasn't driven by fear, but by something else entirely. And that something? It didn't have a complicated name. It didn't come from a coach or a training manual. She called it fun maxing. And at first it sounds ridiculous. Too simple, too soft, too disconnected from the reality of fighting. Because fighting is serious, it's brutal, it's high stakes. You don't walk into a cage thinking about fun. Or do you? Because what if that's exactly what everyone else is missing? And what if the fighters who perform at their absolute peak aren't the ones drowning in pressure, but the ones who are free from it? That's the question Casey O'Neill was about to answer. Not in theory, not in conversation, but in the one place where nothing can be faked. The octagon. And what happened next didn't just prove a point. It changed the way people started thinking about performance itself. And when the moment finally came, it didn't feel the way people expected it to feel. No overwhelming nerves, no suffocating pressure, no voice in her head screaming about what this fight meant for her career, her ranking, her future. That voice was gone, or at least quieter than it had ever been before. Because as Casey O'Neill walked through the tunnel that night, something was different. The same lights were there, the same noise, and the same energy from the crowd vibrating through the arena. But internally, it was calm, almost strangely calm. And instead of repeating the usual thoughts fighters carry into battle, I need to win. I can't lose. Everyone is watching. She kept repeating just one thing. Fun maxing. Again, and again, and again. It sounds small, almost meaningless from the outside. But inside her head, it was everything. It was a reset, a shield, a reminder that this moment didn't have to carry the weight of the past 600 days. Because that's what pressure does. It stacks. Every injury, every doubt, every expectation. It all piles onto one single moment until that moment becomes too heavy to handle. But Casey wasn't carrying that weight anymore. She stepped into the octagon lighter, not physically, mentally. And that changes everything. Because fighting isn't just about strength or technique. At the highest level, everyone is skilled. Everyone is dangerous. The difference comes down to clarity, to decision-making under pressure, to how free you are when chaos starts, and Casey O'Neill was free. Across from her stood Gabriela Fernandez, focused, prepared, ready to test whether this comeback was real or just another story that ends in disappointment. This wasn't supposed to be easy. This was supposed to be a cautious return, a feel-it-out fight, a slow rebuild. But nobody told Casey that. The bell rang, and immediately something stood out. No hesitation, no stiffness, no sign of someone who had been away for nearly 2 years. She moved like she had never left. Sharp, fluid, present. Every strike had intention. Every movement had purpose. But more importantly, there was no rush, no desperation, no forcing of moments. That's what pressure does. It makes you chase. It makes you overcommit. It makes you try too hard. But this was different. This was someone letting the fight come to her. And when you reach that state, something dangerous happens. Your reactions become faster, your reads become clearer, your timing becomes lethal because you're not thinking about outcomes anymore. You're just there, fully present in the moment. And Gabriela Fernandez started to feel it, the pressure. But not the kind that comes from aggression, the kind that comes from control. Because Casey wasn't just throwing strikes, she was flowing. There's a difference. One is forced, the other is natural, and natural performance is where greatness lives. Seconds started ticking. The crowd began to shift. You could feel it in the arena. That subtle change in energy when people realize something is about to happen. Casey saw it. That opening. Not because she was desperately searching for it, but because she was relaxed enough to recognize it when it appeared. And then she pulled the trigger. Clean. Precise. No hesitation. Impact. And just like that, it was over. 3 minutes and 11 seconds into the first round. After 600 days of pain, doubt, and silence. 3 minutes, that's all it took. The arena erupted, but Casey? She didn't explode with emotion. She didn't scream. She didn't release all that built-up frustration in some dramatic moment. She smiled, because for the first time in a long time, it actually felt good. Not just the win, the experience, the process, the moment itself. And that's the part people overlook. Because everyone will talk about the knockout, the comeback, the record, the statistics. 6 wins, 2 losses, back in the conversation. But the real story is what happened inside her mind. Because that version of Casey O'Neill, the one who fought that night, wasn't driven by fear. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She wasn't fighting the crowd or the critics or the pressure of expectations. She was just fighting and enjoying it. Now think about how rare that is. At the highest level of any sport, athletes are drowning in pressure. Every performance is analyzed. Every mistake is magnified. Every result carries consequences. And in that environment, most people tighten up. They become cautious. They lose that edge because they're thinking too much about what's at stake. But Casey, she removed the stakes. Not physically. The fight still mattered. The career still mattered. But mentally, she detached. And that detachment didn't make her weaker. It made her dangerous. Because when you're not afraid to lose, you fight differently. You move differently. You take opportunities others hesitate on. You trust yourself in ways that pressure would normally block. And that's exactly what we saw. This wasn't just a comeback. This was a transformation. From a fighter fueled by emotion to a fighter guided by clarity. From someone reacting to the moment to someone controlling it. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Because if you go back to her earlier fights, you can see the difference. After her win over Roxanne Modafferi, there was tension. There was emotion. There was a reaction to the crowd that revealed something deeper. A need to prove. A need to respond. A need to show something. That version of Casey was powerful, but she wasn't free. And freedom is where the highest level of performance exists. The Casey who walked into Seattle? Different person, same skills, same physical ability, but a completely different mental state. And that mental shift changed everything. Because here's the truth nobody likes to admit. Hard work isn't enough. Discipline isn't enough. Even talent isn't enough. At the highest level, the difference between good and great is mental. It's how you handle pressure. It's how you process failure. It's how you show up when everything is on the line. And sometimes, the key isn't adding more, it's removing what's holding you back. For Casey O'Neill, that was pressure, expectation, the need to prove. And what replaced it? Something that sounds almost too simple to matter. Fun, but not casual fun, not distraction. Focused enjoyment, a genuine connection to what she was doing. And that's what Alysa Liu unlocked. Not through training, not through coaching, but through perspective. A shift in how competition is viewed. Because when you stop treating every moment like it defines your worth, you start performing in a way that actually reflects your true ability. And that's what we witnessed. Not just a win, but a glimpse of what Casey O'Neill can become if she carries this mindset forward. Because if this is what she looks like after 600 days away, what happens when she builds momentum again? What happens when confidence stacks on top of clarity? What happens when this version of her gets even sharper? That's a problem for the entire division, and the scary part? She's just getting started again. But before we jump to what comes next, there's one more layer to this story. One that goes beyond fighting, beyond sports, beyond wins and losses entirely. Because what happened here isn't just about Casey O'Neill, and it isn't just about Alysa Liu. It's about something much bigger. Something that applies to anyone chasing anything. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because when you strip everything else away, what you're left with isn't just a fight story. It's a truth most people spend their entire lives ignoring. We live in a world that teaches you to chase outcomes. Win, achieve, climb, prove. Everything is measured. Everything is compared. Everything is turned into a result. And at first, that works. It pushes you. It drives you. It gives you direction. But over time, it starts to take something from you. The joy. The reason you started in the first place. And once that's gone, everything changes. Because now you're not performing out of love. You're performing out of fear. Fear of losing, fear of failing, fear of not being enough. And that fear, it's heavy. It slows you down. It clouds your thinking. It makes you hesitate in moments where instinct should take over. That's what happens to most people. Not just athletes, everyone. And the crazy part? We don't even realize it's happening. We think the answer is more effort, more pressure, more discipline, push harder, grind more, sacrifice everything. But what if that's the trap? What if the thing you think is making you better is actually what's holding you back? That's the realization hidden inside the story. Because Alysa Liu figured something out that most people never do. She detached, not from the work, not from the effort, but from the outcome. She stopped tying her happiness to results. She stopped letting wins define her. She stopped letting losses break her. And in doing that, she unlocked a level of performance that pressure could never produce. That's how she left, came back, and stood at the top of the world. And Casey O'Neill, she took that same idea and brought it into one of the most unforgiving environments imaginable. A cage, under lights, with everything on the line. And instead of tightening up, she let go. Think about how rare that is. Most fighters, after 600 days away, walk into that moment carrying everything. The injuries, the doubts, the expectations, the fear of what happens if it all goes wrong. But Casey didn't carry that. She dropped it. She replaced it with something that sounds almost too simple to matter. Fun maxing. And that's where people misunderstand this whole idea. They hear fun and think it means not taking things seriously. That's not what this is. This is focus without fear. This is intensity without pressure. This is being fully locked in without being mentally trapped. Because when you enjoy what you're doing at the deepest level, you stop forcing it. And when you stop forcing it, you start flowing, and flow, that's where your best performance lives. That's where timing sharpens. That's where instincts take over. That's where everything you've trained for finally comes out without resistance. That's what we saw in Seattle. Not just a fighter winning, but a fighter free. And that changes how you look at everything. Because suddenly it's not about talent alone. It's not about who trains the hardest. It's not about who wants it more. It's about who can access that state, who can remove the noise, who can show up without the weight of expectation crushing them. And that doesn't just apply to fighting, it applies to you, to whatever you're chasing, your work, your goals, your craft. Ask yourself this: are you doing it because you love it? Or are you doing it because you're afraid of what happens if you don't succeed? Because those are two completely different paths. One leads to growth, the other leads to burnout. One makes you sharper, the other makes you tight. And the difference isn't always visible from the outside. But internally, it changes everything. That's why this story matters. Because it exposes something most people never question. The idea that pressure equals performance. That stress makes you better. That fear is necessary to succeed. Sometimes, the opposite is true. Sometimes the strongest move you can make is to let go. To stop obsessing over the result. To stop tying your identity to outcomes and just do the thing fully, presently, without that constant voice in your head telling you what it means. That's what Alysa Liu did on the ice. That's what Casey O'Neill did in the octagon. And both of them reached a level most people never touch. Now here's the part that should really make you think. What happens if Casey keeps this mindset? Because this wasn't just a lucky night. This wasn't just adrenaline or timing. This was a different version of her. And if that version keeps showing up, the entire division has a problem. Because now you're not dealing with a fighter who's just skilled. You're dealing with someone who's unlocked something deeper. Clarity, freedom, confidence without pressure. And those are the fighters who become dangerous in a different way. Because they don't hesitate. They don't freeze. They don't crumble when things don't go their way. They adapt, they flow, they stay present. And that's incredibly hard to beat. So as her journey continues, it won't just be about who she fights next. It'll be about whether she holds onto this, whether she protects that mindset. Because the world will try to pull her back. The expectations will return. The pressure will build again. The stakes will get higher. And that voice, the one that says you have to win, it will try to come back. The question is, will she listen to it? Or will she keep choosing something different? Because now she knows. She's felt the difference. She's experienced what it's like to perform without that weight. And once you experience that, it's hard to go back. That's what makes this story powerful. Not the knockout, not the comeback, but the shift, the realization that the real battle was never just physical, it was mental. And once that changed, everything else followed. So the next time you feel that pressure building, the next time you feel like everything depends on the outcome, remember this: the version of you that performs at your highest level isn't the one under the most pressure, it's the one that's the most free. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to control everything and just enjoy the moment you're in. Because that's where your best work lives. That's where your real potential shows up. And that's where everything starts to click. Casey O'Neill found that. Alysa Liu proved it. And now the question is, what happens when more people start to understand it? Because if they do, the way we think about performance might never be the same again. And if you've made it this far, you already know. This wasn't just another story. This was a shift in perspective. A different way of looking at what it really means to succeed. So whatever it is you're chasing right now, take a second and ask yourself honestly, are you enjoying it or are you just trying to survive it? Because if it's the second one, maybe it's time to change something. Maybe it's time to try your own version of fun maxing. And if this story hit you in a way you didn't expect, if it made you think a little differently, then you already know what to do. Drop a comment and tell me what your version of fun maxing looks like. Hit that like button if this changed your perspective even a little. And subscribe, because we're not just breaking down fights here, we're breaking down the mindset behind them. And trust me, the next story, it might hit even harder.